Thank you. Good morning. How are we doing? We good? We alive? Excited to be here. Man, was worship just amazing this morning? Did anyone get touched by Jesus? Blessed this morning? I did. Wow, so good. Let's jump right into the word just because of time. But I'm excited for what we're going to dive into this morning. I grew up knowing a lot about God. I grew up as a missionary kid and was in church my whole life. And I had the honor of knowing a lot about God and being taught scripture. But one of the things that I personally lacked was an actual understanding of having a real relationship with God. And I think in the church, we do a really good job of teaching people about God, but we do a really poor job of teaching people how to actually have a relationship, to know God. And I think for a lot of us, we see this even in our day. We see a lot of people leaving the church and leaving the church because of maybe a bad experience they had with a Christian, or they walk away from Jesus because of a bad experience they had in a church. And we see that and we can critique that and we can pick that apart. But there's a part of accountability on our end in the church that we did not do a good job of discipling people to knowing, hey, this isn't about knowing about a God. This is actually about knowing a person intimately. And so we can critique and be like, man, all these people are leaving the church because of their feelings and all these things and they were hurt. But at some point we have to see, wait. There's a disconnect here in how we're actually discipling people in the body. Guys, that if we don't know how to connect with God in the difficulty and in the frustration, if we don't know how to relate with God in it, what we do is we either pull away or we let voices and opinions of others define who God is for us. That if we dismiss difficulty and act like it doesn't affect us, which I promise you it will at some point catch up to you. If we experience difficulty and we just act like, well, this isn't a big deal, it doesn't affect us, if we do that, it'll catch up to you. Or what we can do is we can bring our frustration and our tension and our weakness to God. Now, I'm a father of three. I have two boys and a daughter. And if you know me, I adore my daughter. She's like my little princess, and I believe that she can never do anything wrong and probably will never sin, which I know is not true. But my sons, I treat my sons very differently, right? It's like you love your daughters and you train your sons is kind of my thing. And I love them, and I love the opportunity to grow men who honor God and honor people. But one of the things me and my sons love to do is to wrestle. And almost every night, my sons, they're always like, I want to wrestle. And you know, if you're a dad, at the end of the day, it's like your peak exhaustion, right? You're like, this is the last thing that I want to do right now is wrestle. But there's something about it that is actually so beautiful. And my sons, it's one of their favorite things to do because it's in that moment in that experience of wrestling with their father that they are able to actually get out a lot of their frustration, to release a lot of their pent-up emotions. It's a moment for them to actually test their strength, but further, it's a moment for them to actually feel connected to their father. And in the same way, guys, God sees your frustration and your suffering, your unmet expectations and your questions, and he doesn't want you to pull away from him and deal with them apart from him. He actually wants you to wrestle with him through it. And I want you to understand, because we hear this phrase, wrestling with God or wrestle with God, and I want you to know that this idea of wrestling with God isn't about doubting God. It isn't about just doubting God. It's actually about being close enough to God where you're able to release your frustration, to be messy, where you allow his strength to overtake you, and ultimately where you move into deeper connection. And so this morning, I want to teach on wrestling with God. Now, like I mentioned in the church, we're great at giving you information about who God is, but today I want to help us to actually know how to be close with God. Because it's really easy to be close to God and feel close to God when life is going well and life is easy and you have all the answers. It's easy to feel close to God in those moments, but what do we do when life is confusing and life is painful and it doesn't feel like we have any answers at all? Because the reality is when you're in that place, and if you've been there, your theology can't carry you through. Your understanding of how you interpret passages and your hermeneutics aren't going to carry you through painful seasons. But it's the intimacy that you develop in the wrestling that can. Now, do you know what the biggest temptation that I often see people fall into? The biggest temptation that I often see people fall into is the temptation of comfort and apathy. Now, when we think about temptation, we often think that the devil only tempts us with things that are obviously evil. And at some point, we have to understand that the devil isn't dumb, all right? The devil is crafty. He's not going to tempt you with things that you know is wrong, that you know is evil. Like the devil's not like, hey, here's a cigarette, smoke it, right? And you're like, I don't really like cigarettes. He's like, The devil's going to tempt you with things that may look good, but apart from God is evil. And comfort is one of those things that I see, especially in America, that we fall into the temptation. Because the lie of comfort is to live in ease, in predictability, and to live a life absent of discomfort as a way to experience fulfillment. Let me say that again. The lie of comfort is to live in ease, predictability, and a life absent of discomfort as a way to experience fulfillment. Now, we hear that and we're like, that doesn't sound that bad. Like, I kind of want that, right? It's like, that doesn't sound like a horrible desire, but let me ask you a question. Does this sound like the life of Jesus? Was Jesus' life full of ease and predictability and absent of discomfort? Yes or no? No. Neither is yours. That the life of following Jesus is a life of sacrifice, not of ease. A life of being led by the Spirit, not of predictability. A life of risk and faith, not a life absent of discomfort. And so this is the temptation that comfort can draw you into. And if we're being honest in the room, when we fall into comfort, it actually takes us away from wanting to wrestle with God and deal with our questions and deal with our pain and deal with our brokenness. And if we can get us stuck in our comfort, we'll actually never deal with the things that are below the surface. And we'll live our life for decades acting like everything is okay because now I have reached fulfillment. My life is comfortable, yet there's still questions that you've never seen answered by God. Now there's pain that you've never seen God heal, and now you're carrying it. And not only that, now you're carrying it into your children, and now your children are carrying it into their children. And this is how the temptation of comfort seems like a good, simple thing, but it's actually a trap. And if we're being honest, we have so much more questions than we're willing to be real about. And we have so much more pain than we're willing to be honest about. And I want you to know that, guys, Jesus is not afraid of your mess. He's not afraid of your brokenness. He's not afraid of your questions. If he was, he never would have entered into it. God could have just sent an angel and did the work for him, and here's the decree. If God was afraid of your mess, he never would have came. Fully God, fully man, lived amongst us, experienced every temptation that we did, but yet was without sin. If God was afraid of your mess, then he never would have came close. He's not afraid of your mess. But not only that, he came so that he can redeem your mess. So let's go to Genesis chapter 32. And we're going to camp out here this morning. Genesis 32, verse 24 to 32. And this is a story a lot of us know. It starts out like this. So Jacob was left alone, and a man, who we later find out is God, wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name, Jacob?" He answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans, and you have overcome." Jacob said, "Please let me know your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. And so Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." Now, this is a very peculiar story. It's a very interesting story. But for us to understand the weight of it, we need to understand the backstory of Jacob. Now, Jacob, he was born, literally in the story of Genesis, he was born grabbing his twin brother's heel in the womb, which is where he gets his name, Jacob, which means heel grabber. And after that, we see the story continues, and as they grow up, what happens is Jacob has this moment, because he's the second born, where he wants to steal his older brother Esau's birthright. And so his father Isaac is old and he can't really see. And so what he does is he deceives his father. He dresses up like Esau and he steals his brother's birthright. Now after that, he runs away and he runs to Laban, and Laban promises him his daughter if he works for 7 years. And so he works 7 years for Laban. And at his wedding night, Laban then deceives him and gives him the different daughter. And then after that, he says, well, I want the one that I came for. So he works another 7 years. Then after that, there's more family drama. Then he runs away from Laban, and Laban starts chasing him down. And then right before we get to Genesis 32, he gets the news that Esau is now coming to him with 400 men. And so he's terrified. He's terrified of what's going to happen. Is Esau going to come here and kill me and kill my family? He's coming with 400 men. And what Jacob does is he sends his goods and his families ahead of him to go and meet Esau, to hopefully pacify him, to give him some gifts. And he essentially sends his family in the forefront of the battle, and he stays behind. So we hear this whole backstory. We hear about Jacob's life. We hear about the deception. We hear about the running. We hear about the struggle. And we look at Jacob and we're like, man, this is a messy person. Now in the story of Jacob's life, God keeps promising him blessing and protection, but he doesn't fully trust God. So he keeps fighting and resisting and doing it on his own. But what's beautiful is God doesn't abandon him. God doesn't look at his mess and say, you're too far gone. What God does is God comes and he speaks his language. So he wrestles. And in the middle of the night, God shows up wrestling Jacob. And it was this encounter that we just read that God transformed Jacob, guys, into Israel, who would then form the nation that would be God's chosen people and would be the lineage in which Jesus would come through. And I read stories like this, and it's kind of hard to grasp. Like if we just take a second and be real. This person was a deceiver. This person ran away. This person literally sent his family to be human shields. This person who is messy and broken, yet God chose him to form his nation through. Yet we think, I'm too messy for God to use me. Yet we think, well, I've done too much for God to redeem my story. And I want you to see this because I don't know if you're not reading the same Bible I'm reading. But this is the exact type of people God wants to use. And we've done this thing where, guys, we've disqualified ourselves from being used by God. We've disqualified ourselves. Well, I've done a sin that I don't know if God can ever use me. And what you're doing is you're actually underestimating God's power. and you're overestimating your sin. That yet in Jacob's mess, God chooses him, and God chooses you, and God chooses me. And I want you to know that God can do more with a messy, broken person who is willing to wrestle with God than a person who has it all together living in their comfort. Now, the thing that transformed Jacob from a person of deception to the person that ushered in the Messiah's lineage was in verse 26. It says this, "And the man said, 'Let me go, for it is daybreak.' But Jacob replied, 'I will not let you go unless you bless me.'" That there's something that happens in this desperation when we say, "God, I will not let you go. God, in the suffering, I will not let you go. In the waiting, I will not let you go. In the questions and the doubts, I won't let you go." That there's something in the wrestling when we cling to the Lord in this way, that it actually births transformation. That there is a desperation, guys, in the wrestle that changes us. And what I love about this story was in the wrestling, God wasn't trying to defeat Jacob. He was trying to change him. Now, later on in the story, as we read, there's an interesting moment. Where God asked Jacob what his name was. He says, "What is your name?" And obviously, he's God. He knew his name. But he asked Jacob, "What is your name?" For us to understand the significance of that, let's go to Genesis chapter 27, a few verses earlier. And this is the story where Jacob deceives his father and he steals his brother's birthright. It says this in verse 18, "So Jacob took the food to his father. 'My father,' he said. 'Yes, my son,' Isaac answered. 'Who are you?'" In other words, what is your name, Esau or Jacob? And Jacob replied in deception, "It's Esau, your firstborn son. I've done as you told me. Here's the wild game. Now sit up, eat it, so you can give me your blessing." So going back to the passage we're reading, when God asked Jacob in the wrestling for his name, that moment of wrestling was a redemption of his entire life and his deepest mistake. The question from his father, "Who are you? What is your name?" This moment of his biggest mistake in the wrestling, God reverses and redeems the question, and he says, "What is your name?" Are you catching this? And in this moment, God redeemed his entire life and his deepest mistake. And out of the wrestling, God changes his name. The name Jacob means heel grabber, but it also means deceiver. And he changes his name to Israel, which means the one who wrestles with God, but also means God prevails. So God changed his name from deceiver to God prevails. And in this, guys, God shows us that it isn't what we've done that defines us. It's not our mistakes or our lack of qualifications. It's who he says that we are that defines our identity. And the most transformative thing you can do is to wrestle with God, because that may be the only way for you to get close enough to hear him whisper your name. For you to hear what he really thinks about you. For you to hear what he really says about you. For you to actually receive your identity. And if you stay in comfort for your whole life thinking, well, this is safe, this is predictable, this is easy. But if you never discover your identity, then you're still lost. And so what is identity? If I can define identity for us, identity is where you find your worth or your sense of self. Now, this is a huge topic today, obviously, in culture, because society today wants to tell us that you need to find your identity in all these things, or that you have to work for your identity, you have to maintain your identity, or you can just self-define who you are. And I want you to know that this way of living will always leave you empty, guys. Because whether it's a job or a relationship or even your sexuality, at some point you'll realize that these things can't fully satisfy, and you'll always be searching for who you are. And this is why so many of us struggle with our identity, because we are trying to create an image of ourselves that we think others will affirm so that we can find a semblance of self-worth. But I love what Tim Keller says. He says this, that identity is not achieved, it's received. Identity is not something that you can achieve, it's something that is received. John chapter 1, verse 12 says this, yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. That John tells us that through faith in Christ, you received the right, the inheritance of your real identity, which is to be a child of God. That's something that you can't strive for, you can't earn, your parents can't give you, and they can't take it away from you. It's something that you receive through Jesus. And I love what Tim Keller says on this topic. He says this, what kind of identity do we need? You need the approval and esteem of someone you esteem if you're going to have any self-esteem. So to know that the Lord of the universe loves you, that will give you the most powerful basis for a stable identity. Oh, that's so good. I'm going to read that again, soak that in. What kind of identity do we need? You need the approval and esteem of someone you esteem if you're going to have any self-esteem. So to know that the Lord, the creator of the entire universe, loves you, that will have to give you the most powerful basis for a stable identity. That Jesus died on the cross to restore humanity to its original identity. And this is the good news, guys, that there's no more searching. There's no more looking for external affirmation so that you can feel stable or secure. But now you can find your security in who the Father says you are. In verse 30 and 31, it says this, and Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God. For he said, I've seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared. And the sun was rising as Jacob left Peniel, and he was limping because of the injury to his hip. Now, this is such an interesting detail. We know this if you know the story, that Jacob wrestles with God, and he leaves this encounter with a limp. So not only did God change his name and his identity, he changed how he walked. That this limp was actually a permanent mark of this encounter. And for Jacob, it was that in his weakness, God was able to be made strong. So every single one of us, if you've wrestled with God, you know this, you walk differently now. And the world may look at it and think it's weakness. But it's actually the evidence that we've been changed by God. That for some people you were full of pride and you thought you had it all figured out. But after you wrestle with God, your limp is now that you walk in humility and kindness. For others, you were living in anxiety and control. But after you wrestled with God, your limp is now that you walk in childlikeness and freedom. And the world may look at that and say that's weakness. But God says, in your weakness, I am made what? Strong. And to reiterate that, Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12:9, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. And when we wrestle with God and we come to him with our mess and with our weakness and with our frustration, it's an invitation for his strength to come and work in us and ultimately transform us and for us to know him deeper. Amen? So let's stand. I want to